Today, our focus is on rejoicing in our present. In other words, we rejoice in what we here at St. Paul's do to make the kingdom real. One of the ways we are making the kingdom real is through our wonderful quilt ministry. So when you get a chance and you look at a quilt that may be near you, in front of you, think of the talent, the heart, and the time it takes to make just one quilt. And then consider that our quilters made close to 120 quilts this year. And each quilt is going to serve a purpose. This is the kingdom at work. To me, the kingdom is all about what we are doing for others. And that belief comes from my favorite story in the Bible, the Good Samaritan. And I really love this story. If I could get away with a 13-week sermon series on this gospel lesson, I would do it. But even I would say after the 6th or 8th week, I don't think we can get much gooder than this. This is a fascinating story on many levels. Have you ever noticed that Jesus never calls the Samaritan good? The title, the Good Samaritan, came after over some time. So what makes the Samaritan good? The Samaritan performs at least two actions that put him in the good category. The first is the Samaritan sees the victim. In the Gospel of Luke, seeing is a major theme. For example, in Luke chapter 7, Jesus is invited to a dinner party over at Simon the Pharisee's house. And at that dinner, a woman appears. We are never told her name, but we are told that she is a sinner. So this woman, this sinner, comes and bathes Jesus' feet with her tears. Then she anoints his feet with oil, and then she kisses Jesus' feet. Now Simon, being the law-abiding Pharisee, is quite appalled that this sinner, this woman, has crashed his party. But then Jesus asks Simon a question. Simon, do you see this woman? Now while Simon sees a sinner, Jesus sees a person who needs his help, his forgiveness, and his protection. Another example can be found in Luke 19, the story of Zacchaeus, the tax collector. Now this may surprise you. Tax collectors were not well liked back then. Back then, right? And so in order to see Jesus who has come into town, Zacchaeus climbs a tree. Jesus happens to look up and sees Zacchaeus in the tree. And then Jesus invites himself to Zacchaeus' house. And through all of this, people are stunned and maybe appalled that Jesus is with this tax collector. While others see Zacchaeus as a hated tax collector, Jesus sees Zacchaeus as a person, someone who needed his help, his blessing, and his company. In these examples, Jesus sees and then Jesus helps. Jesus sees and then Jesus helps. Each time Jesus helps people the church had left behind, and Jesus welcomes people whom society has labeled irredeemable. We get that exact scenario played out in our gospel. The priest and the Levite, the religious leaders, they walk away from the victim. Based on Torah law, these two leaders were under strict orders not to touch or go near someone they deemed dirty, bloody, or dead. The priest would have been very familiar with the law that anyone who touched a dead man was unclean for 7 days. To touch the victim would have cost the priest his turn of duty at the temple, and he refused to risk that. Now, the Levites lived by a motto: safety first. Bandits were notorious for using decoys. One of their numbers would act the part of the wounded victim, and when some unsuspecting traveler stopped over him, the others would rush upon that traveler and overpower them. So the motto for this Levite was, my safety first. And then comes the Samaritan. He too sees the victim, but instead of avoiding the victim, the Samaritan walks toward him. This leads to the second action that makes the Samaritan good. When the Samaritan sees what has happened to the victim, he is moved with pity. In the ancient Greek, the term is actually, he had compassion. And this feeling is not something outward. It is deep from within your body, your intestines, your organs. It is deep from within. And these terms, had compassion, occur just 3 times in the entire Gospel of Luke. In Luke chapter 7, Jesus is moved with pity when he sees a widow crying over the death of her only son. In Luke chapter 15, the Father is filled with compassion when he sees his prodigal son return home. And then we get our lesson today. So we have Jesus, a father, and the Samaritan, all having compassion. This is significant because in all 3 stories, someone is moved to act. Jesus is moved to act. The Father is moved to act, and the Samaritan is moved to act. Another thing the Good Samaritan story does is remind us of what God teaches. Do you remember the question the lawyer asked Jesus? Who is my neighbor? I believe the lawyer wants to know who counts and who can be left behind. In other words, who deserves the lawyer's attention. But Jesus changes the question, and now he puts the lawyer on the spot. Who do you think was a neighbor? While the lawyer wanted Jesus to define who to help, Jesus is redefining the helper. Rather than asking, who is my neighbor and who am I supposed to help? God is calling us to act like a neighbor, to act like the Good Samaritan. This is the conduct and action that the lawyer who asked the first question is now called to imitate. So today, I want us to see and have compassion. By the way, the choir are going to have a wonderful rendition of Be Thou My Vision later on, which fits into this theme of seeing. And that hymn is in our hymnal. So if you would like to follow with the wonderful words along with the wonderful music, please do so. But why is it so essential for us to see? I read recently, what is worse than being lost is knowing that no one is looking for you. What is worse than being lost is knowing that no one is looking for you. What draws me close to Jesus these days is that Jesus is always looking for disciples and followers and those who have been left behind, the victims, the poor, the lame, the sinners. Jesus is always looking for his children. Jesus is always looking for them and looking out for them. At St. Paul's, we try to have the same vision and action as Jesus, that we look at people the way that Jesus looks at them, and to have the same compassion as Jesus has. And I can't think of a better time to act like a Good Samaritan. With the rise of social media, the rise of influencers, the power of 24-hour news cycles, the endless spin from so-called political and cultural experts, we spend a lot of our time trying to define who our neighbor is. We spend a lot of time trying to define who our neighbor is. I'm here to remind you, Jesus has already done that. Jesus has told us who our neighbor is. It's everyone. I believe from the bottom of my heart, when we ignore Jesus' definition of neighbor and we try to replace it with some talking head who, by the way, is only human, and this may surprise you, doesn't really care about you. When we do that, we are breaking the first commandment. We cannot be true disciples of God and claim to have no other gods before Him when we continue to listen and to obey others who might agree with us on a topic, or others who just hate the same people we do. If we only gave God the same amount of heart and mind that we do for others. If only. And yet, God still calls us to act. Because no matter how many times we may fail, how many times we sin, God still loves us. Just as Jesus looks for the lost, Jesus looks for us when we go astray. So I say, let this be the day that we give God our full hearts, our full minds, all that we have. See, I wanted Quilt Sunday to be on the same day as the ministry fair so that you could see and then be moved to act. For the quilters this year, there are quilts that will go to a HEPA house, which is a low-income senior apartment complex off of Kerr Avenue. The quilters, the people at this apartment complex were so moved that they've invited the quilters for their holiday party, building fellowship. 20 quilts are donated to a Safe Place to Go, which is opening a residential facility in the spring, and this is a program for domestic sex trafficking victims. And just this week, Deacon Susan and Sarah, our office administrator, drove up to Durham and dropped off 40 quilts that are going to Western North Carolina. Now, in all likelihood, the quilters will never see any of the people who receive these gifts, at least in person. But the quilters have seen the people because God has pointed out the neighbors that are in need. First we see, and then we act. So I hope you get the chance to really think about all the ministries that we offer here, because there are so many ways that you can serve God. In our gospel, the Samaritan is depicted using all his possessions, oil, wine, his animal, silver, his money, to aid an unfortunate victim. He did not spare anything to help someone. We too can give all we have to help and serve. This morning as you came in, you received this. This is a message map that the stewardship team put together to help us see where St. Paul is making an impact, both inside and outside the church walls. When you get a chance, look over this list. And I will say now, it will change and get bigger over time. What we want to do is when people ask what St. Paul's is doing, we can show them this message map. And then it shows them all that we take God's mission seriously. And what we hope is that this message map is the first step in wanting to learn more about the ministries. And in that case, we have our time and talent survey sheets that you can get in person or online. We need to show people that we take God's mission seriously, that we take God's vision of people seriously, because there are so many people waiting to feel seen, cared for, and loved. And you can be the Good Samaritan in their life. Amen.